Welcome everybody. My name is Ciara O'Flynn. I'm the Director for Latin America and the Caribbean here in the Department of Foreign Affairs. I just want to say a very quick word of welcome to everybody, and we're delighted that you could join us here in person in Ivy House. And without further ado, I'm going to pass over to our Secretary General, Joe Hackett, to say some words of introduction before Professor Dermot Keogh delivers his address. Thank you.
Thank you, Ciara. Good afternoon, everyone. You're all warmly welcome to Ivy House. I know that many of you are former colleagues, so you'll be very familiar with this room. But for some of you, it might be your first time here. So for those of you who it is, you're warmly welcome. So we gathered in this room back in February, I think it was, or maybe late January. And we launched our first and new strategy for Latin America and the Caribbean. Minister Coveney launched it, and Ciara, as our regional director, put it all together. And we had on screen foreign ministers join us from across the region. And then a few months later, in May, myself and Ciara and some others went to Mexico, where we had our regional meeting of our ambassadors across Latin America and the Caribbean. We launched we discussed our new strategy. And what struck me is that we're engaging in the region for the first time, really, in a much more comprehensive way. A region where we have such a rich historical context and footprint. And in many ways, the state is only catching up to that now. And so we have a structure that involves really good regional director in Ciara, a regional coordinator out in Mexico as our ambassador, and excellent ambassadors across the region. And as part of Global Ireland, expanded into Chile and into Colombia as well. And it struck me also that up until 1999, when we opened in Mexico, our embassy in Buenos Aires was our only formal diplomatic mission anywhere in that region south of the United States, which was an enormous ask of our team who were there, and many of you were here, and perhaps a failing of the state that we hadn't invested more up until that point. And like so much of Irish foreign policy, that relationship with Argentina has been built through the stories of generations of Irish people and imbued with a strong sense of values. And the longer I'm in this job, the more I appreciate how our calling card as a country and our effectiveness as a country is grounded on the story of our people and the way in which our people want their values expressed in our foreign policy. And I know many of you are here from Longford and Westmeath, and maybe from Wexford as well. It's a remarkable story to think about the type of people who would have left in the middle of the 19th century. Often I gather people who didn't have the right to inherit the farm or the land and chose to make the journey through Dublin Port or Wexford all the way to the other side of the world. It must have been an extraordinary thing to decide to do, or be decided for you in some cases. And a journey that I gathered could take somewhere between 1 and 5 months, usually 3, originally on wooden ships, and then steamships, with all the risks that would have entailed. And then to land in a country where you didn't speak the language, where you probably knew no one, and to make your way in that world. All of you probably know that more than I do. So these were extraordinary people. And the fact that now in 2022 we're talking about their legacy of somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people in Argentina who claim Irish descent. We're gathered in this room. We have a strategy for the region, which is really resting on their shoulders and their legacy. And so if you're from Longford or Westmeath and Wexford, it's especially my privilege to welcome you here today. And I know that you have a society, I think, and I don't know whether Margaret Breheny is here. Are you here, Margaret? Yeah, well, you're very welcome, as are all the people that you represent. Is Bishop Smith here? Well, Bishop Smith, who's meant to be here, there he is, just on top. I think also, and it comes across from Dermot's book very clearly, that and it's not just confined to Argentina, but in so many parts of the world, the contribution made by Irish missionaries, by the Catholic Church, the standing we have today in so many parts of the world also rests on the story of the Church and missionaries in those places. And I'm conscious as well of the family members of Monsignor Kevin Mullen, who may be here, because as you bring out very clearly in your book, Dermot, it's not just the footprint through Irish diplomacy, but it's the effectiveness of people who represented the Holy See in Argentina and also elsewhere. And the values piece and the human story piece, I think, come across particularly well in the story of the late Patrick Rice, a remarkable individual who had a remarkable story, but also was a very graphic demonstration of how foreign policy, the story of the Irish people and values could come together at a particularly dark period in Argentina's history. And I know there's some family members of Patrick's here as well, just to acknowledge his contribution. I'm particularly pleased that as Secretary General of the organisation, that what comes across clearly in the book is the importance and value of an embassy and diplomats. And there are many of you here today, so I won't name check you all. But Justin Harman, who is the reason why many of us are here today, and in his current role with the AEIS, I think deserves particular mention. I think what comes off the page, whether they served at any stage in the 75 years that we've had our embassy in Buenos Aires, shows their dedication, professionalism, and their public service and the sense of gratitude that the state owes them. So I'm particularly pleased that I'm staring directly at our current ambassador, Jackie O'Halloran. You probably can't see that I'm staring directly at you, Jackie. This is your second stint there, and you're coming back this summer, but you've done an outstanding job in your current role in breathing life into the strategy in your country, and I want to recognise and acknowledge your contribution. And in the absence, just to recognise also your counterpart here, Maura Wilkinson, and of course to remember the late Laura Bernal, who passed away here and very poignantly chose to be buried in Mayo for all the reasons that we would know. Dermot, you're a great friend to this department. As I said to you earlier, I think most of us learn more about this organisation from reading your books than actually working here. But you don't just capture in the book the value of our mission there, you bring to life the story of our diplomatic footprint across the region. And you also highlight in parts of the book, particularly in the introductions, and I think deserve great credit for the fact that you have sparked, personally, you have been responsible for sparking a great growth in academic study and research about this department and its contribution. And it's one thing to read a dry book about Irish foreign policy, but it's another skill to bring it to life to the stories of the people who practice diplomacy and who serve this country. So this is I'll embarrass now for mentioning it, but Sarah, who works with me in the office, in the Secretary General's office, is the latest diplomat to be going to Buenos Aires later this year, and I can think of no better training or introduction for her than spending the time in the interim reading your book. So I want to just thank you for the time you took to write the book, but also for your contribution over many years to this department and the public's understanding. As we serve on the Security Council at the moment, I think we're very, very conscious of how much we have in common with many parts of the world that are a great distance away. And Argentina is one of those places where that sense of shared values is very strong, be it in a commitment to disarmament, to multilateralism, to respect and the promotion of human rights, indeed the position they've taken on Ukraine. And I know it's not easy in many parts of the world. And it's something that we don't take for granted. And it hasn't always been easy in the context of Argentina. But it's thanks to the work of our diplomats, it's thanks to the work of Jackie that we have so much in common. And it's a great tribute to those generations who went before that I spoke about at the beginning, that today we are partners on the international stage at a time of great challenge and threat to that rules-based international order. So thank you for your time today. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for the contribution you make in many different fields. And it's my pleasure now to introduce the author of the book that we're here to celebrate, Dermot Keogh.
Thank you, Secretary General Hackett, and thank you all for coming here this afternoon. I recognise many faces in the audience here who have, over the years, helped me greatly to get this book to its final stages and have it between the research between covers. So thank you all for doing that. Before making a few brief comments on the book itself, I wish to thank Professor Izarra of the University of Sao Paulo for being present today. I've relied heavily on your pioneering historical work to guide me in my research and look forward to your future publications in this area. My thanks also to Ambassador Justin Harman, and I think few Irish people and everybody here will agree know Argentina as he does, and as a Secretary General, third Secretary in Buenos Aires in the 1970s and Ambassador to Argentina between 2014 and 2007, accredited to Chile, Paraguay, Uruguay and Bolivia, an entire empire. He appears in the pages of this volume as a principal actor in 1976 in the successful diplomatic campaign to prevent the murder of Father Patrick Rice and secure his early release. I would also like to thank Marie O'Donovan, who is representing Cork University Press here today, and Dr. Michael Murphy from the Geography School, who drew the maps in the book. Now, when I first began in the 1970s to write on the revolutionary period in Ireland, I quickly became aware that the historiography was overwhelmingly centred on the military conflict and on Anglo-Irish relations. The work between 1919 and 1921 of the new Department of Foreign Affairs and Diplomatic Service, together with the Department of Publicity, received short shrift in the few history books available at the time. But working under Professor Joe Lee in the 1970s, I had my horizons widened to see clearly that Dáil Éireann diplomacy complemented the domestic struggle. The men and women who represented Ireland abroad during those vital years are now receiving due attention in contemporary scholarship, in, for example, Gerard Keown's book and in many other works, including the first volume of Documents on Irish Foreign Policy. It was evident from British archives, at least evident to me, that the Empire was not well equipped to deal with the mobilisation of the Irish diaspora. Abroad, British government did not have the tools of coercion and repression available to suppress freedom of speech. For example, the British files for that period, 1919-21, revealed that Irish Argentines mobilised after the death in October 1920 of the Lord Mayor of Cork, Terence McSweeney, and sent sizable sums of money home to help alleviate the suffering. In a later but related area, I wrote but did not publish in 1983 a diplomatic history of Ireland during the Falklands-Malvinas crisis. When I fixed finally on the idea of writing a history of Ireland and Argentina in the 20th century, my approach to the topic was, although not exclusively, to use the methodology of the diplomatic historian. That meant complementing the DFA material with research in Ottawa, Washington, Buenos Aires, and archives in Europe, including the Holy See. And when I said earlier that my approach was not exclusively diplomatic history, I meant that I also researched the archives of the Irish religious working there, which I refer to in the text as Irish soft power. In other words, since the 19th century, Irish Catholic missionaries and other denominations worked in Argentina and helped build and solidify the Irish Argentine community. Travelling to different parts of Argentina over the past 20 years, I received great cooperation and kindness from those Irish Argentines who were kind enough to share their family histories with me. Through the pages of the Southern Cross and the archives of its editor-proprietor, William Bulfin, I traced Irish-Argentine engagement in the Gaelic League at the end of the 19th century and in Sinn Féin at the beginning of the 20th century. Eamon Bulfin, son of William, whose son Michael is here today, took part in the 1916 Rising and was sent in 1919 as a Dáil Éireann envoy to Buenos Aires. He was later joined by Lawrence Ginnell and Patrick J. Little, two other diplomats of the first wave. Indebted to the Argentine diaspora, Eamon de Valera showed his personal appreciation to an Irish-Argentine delegation attending the Eucharistic Congress in Dublin in 1932, and 3 years later, after further lobbying of the Irish in Buenos Aires, the Department of Foreign Affairs wrote to a leading Irish-Argentine, Monsignor Usher, on the 18th of February 1935, that de Valera felt, and I quote, "the time had indeed come for the appointment of an official Irish representative in the Argentine," unquote. However, he added, in true de Valera style, that, and I quote, "a little time must still elapse before the final step is taken," unquote. That decision was anomalous, as Ireland only opened a legation in Madrid in 1935, in Rome in 1937, in Ottawa in 1939, Switzerland in 1940, and in Portugal in 1942. Irish Argentines waited patiently for the arrival of an Irish envoy, who eventually came to Buenos Aires in December 1947. His Argentine counterpart arrived in Dublin in 1948, and both missions became embassies in 1964. In 1968, a second diplomat was posted to Buenos Aires, which remained the only Irish mission in Latin America until the end of the 20th century, when an embassy to Mexico was opened. Now, while de Valera in the 1930s saw the need to reward the loyalty of Irish Argentines and to provide diplomatic cover for the Irish Catholic missionaries in a country which oscillated between democracy and dictatorship, he did not develop a Latin American policy and integrate the embassy in Buenos Aires into a broader Irish foreign policy strategy. Here, in parenthesis, I would say that between the late 1950s and 1976, Irish policy at the UN supported a pro-Argentine stance on the Falklands Malvinas. But Buenos Aires remained an outlier as an embassy until Gareth Fitzgerald became minister in 1973, and his ideas, coupled with membership of the EEC and international circumstances in the region, resulted in a more clearly defined policy towards Argentina and indeed towards Latin America. There were 6 coups d'etats in Argentina in the 20th century, and that does not include the coups within the coups. Irish diplomats there worked in difficult and dangerous circumstances, and none more so than between 1976 and 1983, when the armed forces established a military junta leading to the disappearance, torture and murder of thousands of its citizens. Irish Catholic missionaries had grown in number during the 1960s and 70s in response to papal pleas to send missionaries to Argentina. And many of that generation worked not with the Irish Argentines, but worked in poor areas, which made them, in the eyes of some members of the military, made them subversivos or subversives. Chapter 5 of the book provides a detailed account of how two embassy staff, Ambassador Wilfred Lennon and Justin Harman, helped save the lives of an Irish citizen, the worker priest Patrick Rice, and the catechist Fatima Cabrera. Even in the new era of social media, the Rice rescue mounted by the embassy in 1976 between the 12th of October and the beginning of December, when Patrick Rice was released and allowed to go back to Ireland. I think this particular episode and the way in which it was handled by the embassy, two diplomats working in relative isolation, should act as a lesson for Irish diplomats today going into similar areas. While I deal also with the courageous human rights work of another Irishman, Monsignor Kevin Mullen, whose brother Jerome is here today. Kevin Mullen was posted to the Apostolic Nunciature in Buenos Aires in the middle of the 1970s, and Chapter 6 deals in detail with the course of, it deals with his activities and his courageous and outspoken defence of human rights during a time when his very life was in danger. By Chapter 6 in the book deals with the course of Irish diplomacy during the Falklands-Malvinas crisis and the War of 1982. Successive generations of Irish diplomats in Buenos Aires had written reports about the fervour of Argentines for the return of those islands, which the British had taken by force in 1833. The Irish embassy advised Dublin frequently on the strength of feeling in Buenos Aires among Irish Argentines in particular, and that also applied to other ethnic groups, the Italians and Basques, Spaniards, Galicians, etc. Many Irish Argentines, that is, excoriated the Irish ambassador Patrick Walsh in early April 1982 for his government's support for UN Resolution 502, and in the middle of the month, the 17th of April 1982, for its support for EEC sanctions. However, I show that the brickbats became bouquets in May, when Ireland was perceived by both Irish Argentines and the Argentine government to have performed a volte-face on that particular issue. That, of course, was a particularly challenging period for the two serving Irish diplomats, as was also their work environment during the slow fall of the junta in 1983 and its aftermath, the restoration of democracy, the successful restoration of democracy. In fine, the Falklands-Malvinas crisis demonstrated the professional importance of having an embassy in Buenos Aires, as had, of course, earlier crises in the 1950s and 1960s, particularly the last days of Perón in 1955, when when he was overthrown in a coup d'etat, and Irish priests and nuns and others working in Argentina at the time were facing sort of a difficult environment in which to carry on their teaching duties or pastoral duties. In conclusion, I'm grateful to Ambassador Jackie O'Halloran and the many other Irish diplomats who have helped me, and many of them are here today, while I was writing this book. With Irish embassies now in Mexico, Chile, Colombia and Brazil, where there is also a consulate general, Latin America has assumed a new and growing position of importance in Irish foreign policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Keogh. Thank you, Dermot, for your presentation and for your book and for all of your support. Just to give people a little overview of how we're going to proceed next, I'm going to pass the floor to our esteemed guests, Justin Harman and Laura Izarra. Justin, then Laura, and then we'll turn it over to Jackie O'Halloran, our ambassador in Buenos Aires, who's coming in virtually. And then we'll open the floor to comments and questions that people may have for the panellists, or indeed just would like to share with the audience. So, Justin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ciara, and thanks indeed to the Secretary-General and Ciara, Morris and everybody involved in hosting this event today. And more generally, thank you to the Department and the Embassy in Buenos Aires for the support in ensuring the translation and publication of this book in Argentina. Last year, under the auspices of the Asociación of Irish Studies of the Southern Cone countries of Latin America, of which I am president. I also wanted to thank Cork University Press. There aren't many copies, I think, in the room, but it is an absolutely superbly produced book. I absolutely recommend it. It's an absorbing volume of exhaustive and meticulous scholarship that represents the culmination, as we know, of decades of research. It is quite an extraordinary achievement by Dermot Keogh. It's a sequel to his earlier book on Irish independence, The Argentine Connection, which we were very pleased to have published in Buenos Aires in 2016. Now, I know historians do not like to refer to any study as being definitive, since interpretation of history must always evolve. But this book will doubtlessly be seen as the conclusive account of a unique bilateral relationship. Dermot Keogh quotes early on the US Ambassador Bill Burns, who coincidentally was my colleague in Moscow, who in his memoirs noted that effective diplomats embody many qualities, but at their heart is a crucial trinity: judgment, balance and discipline. These qualities are indeed also those of the historian, and this volume is a demonstration of each of them. Superb judgment and balance, and a truly phenomenal discipline in the compilation and annotation of the historical facts based on exhaustive primary research. It has been a great privilege for me to be associated with this book, which is groundbreaking, I think, on many levels. It provides an account of over a century of Irish-Argentine history. It provides what is a unique insight into the assessments of generations of Irish diplomats, some of whom are here in the room, of the political, social and economic developments in Argentina. And I think it's probably the only painstaking assessment of the activities of a single mission, based on that mission's own reporting since its establishment. And as such, I'm sure it will be a template or a model for other such analyses in the future. Dermot Keogh has provided, importantly, a pathway for future research to which we in the Irish Studies movement in Latin America attach particular priority. In this context, there is particular importance, I should mention, attached now to the digitisation and preservation of the archives of the Southern Cross, reflecting 140 years of shared history. There are significant mentions of these archives in this volume, and we hope that it will be possible to progress this in the near future. All of us who are involved with the region are in Dermot's debt for his analysis of the evolution of Irish foreign policy towards Latin America. We're very pleased, therefore, to see that this volume is being launched today in the context of the new strategy, which itself is a reflection, as has been previously said by the Secretary-General, of the importance now being attached to the region. The book deals extensively with two individuals whom I knew in that period. They have already been mentioned, and they became, both of them, close friends, whose friendship I always valued, both Pat and Kevin. I am delighted that members of the Rice and Mullen families are here today. The disappearance and torture of Pat was a defining event. Following his eventual return to Argentina, he engaged in the fight for human rights, notably the rights of the disappeared. He had an acute understanding of the importance of effective international action. While always vigilant, he was very proud of the priority given to human rights by the succeeding democratic governments of Argentina. I'm in fact a witness to the enduring effort by Argentina to bring the guilty to justice. In 2019, 43 years after the event, I gave evidence in a trial which led to convictions of individuals involved in the torture of both Pat and of Fatima Cabrera. It was in those very fraught conditions that I also met another remarkable Irishman, Kevin Mullen, who forcefully and skillfully used his position in the nunciature to defend the rights of the disappeared. He provided a vital contact for many, relentlessly pursuing the authorities. Despite a threat to his life, Kevin Mullen did not fear for himself, and he did not refrain from speaking out. Bob Cox, who was the former editor of the Buenos Aires Herald, rightly remarked in a recent message to Pope Francis that Kevin was an outstanding example of bravery and decency, who saved lives by pressing the authorities to account for those forcibly abducted. I've cooperated with Jerome, his brother, for whom the loss of his brother has been such a source of pain, in investigating the circumstances of his very untimely death in Havana and in the preparation of a book on his life. Finally, I just wanted to say the 1970s left deep fissures, which are evident, I think, in contemporary political debate in Argentina. It's sometimes asked whether the impact of that period is preventing the national consensus required to support essential structural change. It's difficult to formulate a clear answer to that question, but one point is very clear to me. The Argentina of 2022 has been transformed from the country to which I arrived in the 1970s and which is described so vividly in the pages of this book. There is an acceptance of the inviolability of individual fundamental rights, which was absent in the 1970s, and which, in fact, permitted the violent atrocities of that decade. Democracy has been consolidated. The experience of Argentina in the 1970s is surely proof of the essential truth of Churchill's aphorism that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon. It is really a great honor to be part of this launch of this landmark on the diplomatic relations between Ireland and Argentina. So I would like to thank a lot Justin Harman and Professor Dermot Keogh for inviting me for this prestigious occasion. and for the opportunity to meet Latin America and Caribbean Unit Director Ciara O'Flynn and Secretary General Joe Hackett, and our ambassador at a distance from Argentina, Jackie O'Halloran. In the forewords of President Michael D. Higgins in this book, he says, "It does not shy away from difficult subject matter," end quote. As between 1930 and 1976, the year I left my country and emigrated to Brazil, a turning point in my life and of many other young people at that time, the armed forces overthrew 6 governments, putting democracy at risk again and again, and forcing the young to emigrate or to take up arms. We lived those dark times of restricted democracy and military rule with fear, a fear that directly affected the memory of 3 generations, my parents, mine, and my students, and of course the following generations, that creates a cultural trauma still to be healed. I praise Professor Keogh's book and speak out its value not from a historian's perspective, but from the point of view of someone who loves literature and history, as I am a strong believer that narratives from both fields are tightly linked. Literature representing those dark times allows us to read the silences provoked by individual and collective traumas which lie hidden in between the lines of history. But Professor Keogh's magnificent achievement is that he also brought to his readers the history from below, with first-hand stories which were silenced by fear in the years of dictatorship, repression, and disappearances. He also gives visibility to the importance of Irish missionary soft power and Irish diplomacy struggling for the denunciation of human rights abuses. Buenos Aires, the great metropolis, has always been the center of the country, but repression and disappearances in a divided Argentina reverberated all over it, with paramilitary forces from all political sides committing atrocities. The attacks on Irish religious expanded to all third world priests spread throughout the country. The pre-announcement of the massacre of the Palatines in 1976 in Buenos Aires was the attack to third world Salesians of the Institute Juan 23 in Bahia Blanca, where I graduated just a year before the paramilitary forces broke into the priest's house in 1975 and killed Father Carlos Dorniak, a professor and vice rector of that university, while the other priests escaped through the roofs of the building. Echoing the introduction, where Professor Keogh registered U.S. Ambassador Burns' words, I had the chance to see my country through his extensive research and above all, understand much better what my generation lived through those years of chaos. I am immensely grateful for that, Professor Keogh. The last 2 chapters on the war in the Malvinas, which brings new sources of diplomatic relations to the reader, and the evolution of Irish policy towards Latin America in this century, gives us hope for the years to come. The historical documents, archives, and testimonies analyzed along the book, as well as the appendix, the rich notes, and the extensive bibliography, add more value to Professor Keogh's extraordinary study that becomes a model to be followed by future studies on the connections between Ireland and other Latin American countries, a still untracked field of research. I must stress here the important role that the Ireland strategy for Latin America and the Caribbean should play in the process of a restored memory and historicity, so that those 33 countries could find out ways to self-understand hidden vestiges of their past and definitely achieve a global political and economic independence. I would like to end quoting two outstanding contemporary Irish writers, because Ireland and Argentina in the 20th century invites us to see new things, as Seamus Heaney's poem Squaring in 1991 in his collection Seeing Things enlightens the purpose of outstanding works like this one. I quote, "And after the commanded journey, what? Nothing magnificent, nothing unknown, a gazing out from far away, alone, and it is not particular at all, just old truth dawning. There is no next time round, and roofed scope, knowledge freshening wind." And I think that Dermot's book is that. Finally, the book has received many impressive reviews, and I will end reading John Banville's powerful endorsement, which encapsulates also in few words, and I quote, "the absorbing and in many instances surprising study of Irish relations with Argentina through years of turbulence, tyranny, and progress. A fine achievement and a splendid book." So on behalf of Latin American associations and chairs of Irish studies and researchers in general, I deeply thank you, Dermot, for your precious legacy to Irish studies in Latin America. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Izarra. That was a beautiful tribute to Professor Keogh's book, but also to the connections between Ireland and Argentina. And thank you, Justin, for your comments as well. And from my perspective, we're learning a lot today, I think, from all of our panelists here. So we really appreciate your knowledge and everything you're passing on to us. I'll open the floor now to Ambassador Jackie O'Halloran, who's joining us from Buenos Aires. And I hope that the connection will work. And we're very pleased to listen to you, Jackie, today.
Thank you very much, Ciara, and I would like to thank you and the rest of the team in the Latin America and Caribbean unit for organising this event today, and for all the hard work and the effort which I know has gone into that. This is really today is a great day in the celebration, our celebrations of the 75 years of diplomatic relations between Ireland and Argentina, because not only do we have this great launch event of the English version of Professor Keogh's history of the 20th century relationship, but I believe that the Fragata Libertad has also arrived in Clew Bay, and with the crew will be visiting Foxford these days too. So these were very important part of our celebrations, our joint celebrations of the 75th anniversary. I think all the speakers, what they have shown and what the book brings out so much is the importance and the strength of the relationship between Argentina and between Ireland. And I think, you have there embodied in the audience today so many people who have been a part of that history and a part of that relationship. And as the Secretary General said, the strength of it is in our people. I saw the Longford Westmeath Association had their first annual asado in 3 years over the weekend, and was enjoyed very much their posting of the tango dancing at that. And I just think it's so wonderful that we have this relationship, that Ireland has this relationship with Argentina, and that there are so many historical and people to people links. And also, it's just so great now that all this is happening in the context of the LAC strategy, and that today's meeting and today's hosting of this book launch is also part of that. Earlier this year in Argentina, we launched the Spanish version in Argentina's National Library and with Minister Catherine Martin. And that was another wonderful event marking the importance of Professor Keogh's book and the contribution that it makes to the relationship and for studying the diplomacy of Latin America and Ireland. We also had, and here I really want to thank both my colleagues in the Argentine Embassy in Ireland and the Argentine Foreign Ministry for the wonderful exhibition that was hosted in the Palacio San Martin by the Cultural Directorate of the Argentine Foreign Ministry and the Museum of the Argentine Foreign Ministry on the 100 years of our diplomatic relationship, if we go back to those early days of the foundation of the state and the Guinel mission, which Professor Keogh also mentioned in his relationship. So I believe that this is an important moment in the history of our relationship, but also looking to the future and the strength of Irish studies now in the region. And there, it's just great that both Justin and Laura, Professor Izarra, are there today because they have both, in their different ways, made such an enormous contribution to the development of Irish studies in the region, which is really going from strength to strength. And as Laura said, is encompassing wider fields than history. It's really it is really developing in so many ways, and again bringing so much to Ireland's relationship with the region. So just to say again, thank you for hosting this launch today. And I also wanted to say on a personal level how lucky that our new diplomats coming to Argentina are, that they will have this wonderful book to read. So thank you again, Professor Keogh, for all the work and all the dedication and love that has went into writing the book. And, you know, here in the Irish Embassy in Argentina, we're just very privileged and pleased to have been able to assist with bringing it to completion and this great work. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jackie. I know you personally have done so much to support the work in the book, but also support the implementation of our new LAC strategy. So we're very thankful to you for that. And also, I'm sure our new diplomats going to Buenos Aires are thankful for the legacy that they'll inherit from you and from Justin and from many of the other colleagues in the room who've served in Buenos Aires and the region. So thanks again. I'm also delighted that you mentioned the visit of the naval ship Libertad, and we're very grateful to the Argentinian embassy, who are represented by the Deputy Ambassador today, for organising this visit to Ireland to celebrate our 75 years of diplomatic relations, and we really look forward to seeing the ship in the waters around Dublin in the next couple of days. So thank you for that too. I'd like to open the floor to anybody who would like to make a comment or ask a question. Adam has a roving mic, so you will be heard. So please just raise your hand, and we'd love to hear from the audience. We've got... Thanks, Adam.
Thank you. My name is Joe Carroll, and I used to work for the Irish Times, so maybe this kind of question is a more journalistic question. Excuse me, I'll address it to Dermot, really. He mentioned the word volte-face in policy. Now, imagine that diplomats must tremble when they hear there's a volte-face in Irish policy. And I have a recollection in this building of an ashen-faced Sean Donlan trying to explain to a group of Irish journalists what this volte-face in Irish policy was about. I mean, he found it very difficult to explain it. All he could say was, this is happening. Now imagine for the diplomats out in Buenos Aires at the time, this must have been an extraordinary time. 1 minute you're on one side, next minute, without, I think, and Dermot brings this out, without any consultation with professional diplomats or with even possibly the Minister for Foreign Affairs at the time, suddenly policy has changed. So maybe Justin, I'm sure, would be good on this too. But I'll just ask Dermot, I mean, how did Foreign Affairs, did it leave a lasting impression on Foreign Affairs that you can't trust your ministers, or that you must be ready for every possibility?
I'm going to diplomatically sidestep that.
Partially to answer to your own question, Joe, I would say that the Irish diplomats, and particularly in the Irish diplomatic tradition, have a resilience and an ability to confront all situations in a professional way. So during this very volatile period in Irish foreign policy, I think that the diplomats central to the decision-making were, I would say, tested to the limits of their professional capability. And in an interesting way, were able to, I think, take a policy that was on the point of being derailed, the national interests of the country being derailed, and refining and revising and finding formulae that enabled the policy, particularly the Security Council and elsewhere in Europe, to be put back on solid footing. Now that was the case in relation to the Security Council, on which Ireland served at the time. The difficulty was more problematical to deal with direct instruction to withdraw from sanctions, the AEIS sanctions. And sanctions had been imposed on the 17th of April, and they were to be extended. For a month, and they came up for renewal in mid-May. So the crisis in the UN, the Security Council, occurred at the beginning of May. On the 2nd, there was a government statement, and on the 4th, and then in between, there was a statement made by a minister, which had not received full authorisation, and intended to place the Irish government in a position which, even in a refined way, or in refining the policy, was not the government's policy, but the headline went around the world and could not be recalled. But in the case of sanctions, the direct instruction was to withdraw, and that was more problematical. It wasn't easy to change that particular instruction. The instruction in relation to the UN had been refined, and if I remember correctly, the instruction to call for an immediate meeting of the Security Council was changed to call immediately for a meeting of the Security Council, which allowed the Secretary General, who prepares to quite hard to pursue his peace initiative, and also there was a Hague initiative at the time. So that particular instruction came at a time when it could have been a hand grenade thrown into the Security Council. That wasn't the case. So the issue then was all sanctions, and Ireland withdrew from sanctions, and the British believed that because Ireland withdrew from sanctions, the Italians withdrew from sanctions, and that was particularly damaging. That certainly caused let's say, something of an earthquake in Anglo-Irish relations. So, another generation of historians, there ought to even be a historical commission to look at this particular question. It's so complex, and the sort of micro history of writing in this area would require a range of different disciplines to really tease out the shifts and changes that took place around that time. So I hope I've succeeded in not answering that question. But simply to say that in the book, when you're sitting before a computer and you're taking sentences and you're refining them and revising them and going back to them, speaking spontaneously as I am now, I'm trying desperately to avoid simplifying the narrative that I've made terribly complex.
We have another question from Colin Rafter, who's conveniently beside.
Thank you very much. Is this working?
Yes.
Yeah. Colin Rafter, I was Secretary of the Embassy during the Falklands and Malvinas period, so I can answer your question at least in part, Joe. It's worthwhile remembering that it was a different era. Communications with Dublin were very difficult. You relied on telex machines, and sometimes when the telex message would be going out, there'd be a blip. In other words, somebody was listening in. It was an extraordinary period because we were on the Security Council. It was very sensitive because of British-Irish relations. It was sensitive because of our role in the European Union. And it was also sensitive because we had 2 Irish journalists in town at the time, which was quite extraordinary, at least at the time. The late, great Jerry Barry and Olivia O'Leary, who's still with us, of course. So from when I had no involvement in the actual change of position in Dublin, but when we did change our position, as Dermot said earlier in his address, we were perceived to be pro-Argentine, which of course wasn't the case. And we went from a situation whereby you couldn't talk in English quite loudly in a public space to where, oh, you're Irish, you're fantastic, you support us. No, we don't. Oh, yes, you do. We know that. And this was a period when practically every apartment except my own had an Argentine flag hanging over the balcony. So, from a point of view of the embassy in Buenos Aires at the time, the change of vote fast, or whatever word you want to use, was not a problem. It may have been a problem for Sean Donlan and others, and indeed for Noel Dora in New York, but it was an extraordinary period, and we found ourselves in a situation where people were actually listening to us. I'll give you 2 examples, and I'll finish then. There was an Argentine journalist based in New York, and at this time, satellite TV was still in its infancy, and he would doorstep Noel Dora coming out of the UN, ask him a question in Spanish. Noel Dora would reply in English. He would mistranslate into Spanish. I say mistranslating that he said what he wanted Noel Dora to have said. Now, Noel Dora said nothing in the first place, but that was okay. The other example, the ambassador at the time, Patrick Walsh, said there was a message in from Dublin because the Foreign Minister, Jerry Collins, made a speech in the Dáil which addressed some of the issues. And he said to me, get me, please, a meeting with the Foreign Minister. So I rang the Foreign Ministry, and they said, we'll ring you back. I said to the ambassador, go home. I will stay in the office and take the call. The call came through at 6:20 in the evening. You'd see the ambassador at 8 o'clock. I rang the ambassador, told him to be at the Foreign Minister at 8 o'clock, and I went home, switched on the television. I watched all the news programmes all evening, and at 8 o'clock, suddenly they went over to the Foreign Ministry because, again, there was a journalist permanently situated outside the Foreign Ministry, and said the Irish ambassador has just arrived. And 20 minutes later, the Irish ambassador has just come out. And he asked a question. And, of course, the Irish ambassador replied saying absolutely nothing. But just to give you a flavour of the time. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Colin. Would anyone else like to come in from the floor before we wrap up for the day? Margaret, there. Thank you.
Margaret Brahney, President of SILAS. I'd like to say on behalf of SILAS how pleased and thrilled we are to see this book finally be available to people. It's a wonderful accomplishment, a wonderful study, and its value to researchers and students of Irish-Latin American relations and history is absolutely enormous. From the point of view of, many different disciplines, not just history, social history, sociology, politics, human rights, international relations, diplomacy. There are so many subject areas that, this book touches, and not to mention, methods in historical study. in archives that are dispersed across the Atlantic on both sides. It's just an enormous, tremendous achievement, and I'd like to say a really huge congratulations to Professor Keogh on our behalf. And the book, I hope, will circulate widely amongst all our members and their students and researchers. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Margaret. I think we've got one more comment over here.
My name is Jerome Mullen, brother of Kevin Mullins. First of all, I want to say how delighted I am to be here today to congratulate Dermot on this wonderful book that he has put so many years of toil into. I want to thank him in particular about the fact that he made contact with me and my brother some 8 years ago because he brought the story of my brother to life. Something that we didn't know anything about. It was a revelation to us to discover the work that Kevin had done in the years that he was in Argentina. So I want to thank him particularly for making contact with us and bringing us together, and it was a delight for me to work with Dermot over the past 8 years. But he also did a couple of other things too as well. He brought a friendship of Justin Harman, Ambassador Justin Harman, who was a great friend of Kevin's, and we have been friends over the last 8 years. And in addition to that, he made me aware of a book that was written by Bob Cox called Dirty Secrets, Dirty War, or rather it was his son who wrote the book. And I was able to make contact with Bob Cox over the last 8 years and build a friendship with him to this very day. And so I am so delighted to be here today to see the launch of this wonderful book that we've waited on for so long, and he has achieved the end result of bringing this wonderful history of Ireland and Argentina in the 20th century, and for the revelations that he brought in relation to my own brother. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We have one quick comment behind, and then we'll wrap up. Thanks.
I'm Pat Royce here. I'm a nephew of the late Patrick Royce. Just to thank Dermot publicly for his great work. It's documented a history that we never knew about as a family. In particular, it's great to meet Justin here, to see Justin here as well. Being to Buenos Aires and being around the world, or around that side of the world, it's a fascinating place. I had the pleasure of accompanying my uncle, once it's not a pleasure, through ESMA, and telling me where he was in ESMA and where he wasn't in ESMA. And I suppose just to say thanks to Dermot for putting in paper, because for our family, it's for my cousins and for the next generation, it's a piece of work that we can always refer back to. And obviously there's plenty of art. We've wandered out, most of the family at this stage have wandered out to Buenos Aires. We know our way around it. We won't get lost there. And a pleasure to say thanks to Dermot, and thanks for putting on this as well today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I'm really glad that the families of Kevin and Patrick were able to be with us today, and for your contributions, which I think, sum up the event and the book really well, and that Dermot has captured, that the connections between Ireland and Argentina go very deep, from the very, very personal and very familial, and I know so many people represent that here today, through to the history and the diplomacy and the political context as well. So all that's left for me to do really is to thank everybody for joining us. It's been a pleasure to see you all here in person. person. We're really grateful here in Ivy House that there's such an interest in Ireland-Argentina relations led by all of you here, and we're looking forward to staying in touch, sharing the details of our new strategy with you and hearing about the activities that you're doing, and the two will match up very well, I think. Also want to thank Fergal Mythen, our Director General for Ireland, UK and Americas Division, for a few more weeks, for joining us here today and for leading our policy on the Americas over the last few years. Thank you, Dermot. Thank you, Lara. Thank you, Justin. Thank you to the Secretary General, and thank you all again for joining us. And Jackie, of course, virtually. Okay, have a great afternoon. Thank you.